Hello there. One thing I've noticed in my colleagues and in myself is that performers are often really hard on themselves. Is it a good or bad thing to be hard on yourself? I mean, I guess it's if you're not critical of yourself, how do you improve? But on the other side, if you're so hard on yourself, then you're constantly squashing yourself in your own head, then you're not really reaching your potential as a performer. This has been a tough one for me, and it's really only quite recently that I've managed to work it out for myself. I had this kind of epiphany after a performance that I had that critical voice in my head really loud, to the point where I got off the stage and I walked kind of out through to the backstage, and then I just burst into tears. And they were all these wonderful friends of mine because it was at a festival, and they just kind of didn't understand why I was so upset, because from their perspective, the performance seemed to be fine. It was only just that I had this really high standard for myself that I hadn't managed to meet. And I remember one of them said something that just really went and blew my mind. And they said, "Man, you just need to drop the bar." And I suddenly thought, wow, okay, yeah, I do. I am going to fail if the bar's that high. And then it finally hit me, like, there's two mental states, and they sort of have to be separate. You've got the performance state and then you've got the practice state. Each state is really specific, and the goals for those states are actually completely different, and they shouldn't overlap. I mean, it's a bit like the difference between like writing and editing. Like when you're writing a draft of something, it's a state of creativity and you're meant to be as free as possible. But when you're editing, that's when you're looking at sentence structure and whether the whole thing's working in a technical way. But if you try to edit as you go, then you kind of stop the flow of that creativity. Most writers will talk about bad first drafts. Well, there's definitely a version of that for performance as well. Practice is mostly a drudge. I mean, if you're doing it right, it should be. I mean, you should be really tired after it. It is a really critical mindset. It's really deliberate. You're stopping, starting, you're slowing things down, you're breaking things into smaller pieces, and you're really listening to yourself, and you're trying to work out what doesn't sound good. I mean, you're really ripping into yourself. You're looking for flaws. You're trying to make it better. But performance is a totally different state of mind, and it's a totally different space in the universe, really. It's a gift of art to a particular audience. Your focus is on storytelling. You're creating a narrative to draw the listeners into a different place. Like you want to put them on a higher plane. And it's at its most sublime when you're in a state of reverence and curiosity and humility, basically. It's kind of a playful, inviting space. And it's really important that at that point, you're not critical of what you're about to offer. And in fact, you really have to believe in what you're giving at that point. Your focus is no longer on yourself, but in embodying the narrative of the piece that you're giving over to that audience. Criticism is just destructive in that environment. For a start, it takes up too much of your brain. You end up getting spiraling thoughts, and you end up in the past. Because you have to keep going in a performance. You can't be back where you made that mistake. Criticism is destructive in two ways, both in the act of criticizing yourself, but also the fear of criticism from your audience and judgment from them. I mean, they are here and they've got a vested interest in your success. They already want to love you. All that's left is for you to give them the gift of the performance that you have prepared and that you are capable of at that point. And the potential of that performance can only be at that stage limited by how much you get in your own way. In other words, how much you get in your own head and how much you get into that critical place. I now believe that the performance place is like a sacred space, and you and the audience exist there together. And if things are going well, you almost become one. That whole space even extends when you finish performing and when you and the audience are still in the same place together. Accept compliments graciously and try to keep this coat of armor of gratitude around you to ward off that desire to sort of post-mortem the performance straight away. I mean, if there's something you want to remember about the performance, write it down and then forget about it until you're back in that next sacred space which is the practice space again. And it's that cycle going between those two modes. So that's my Thursday tip for you today. Thanks. See you later.